welcome, Farewell fans, and welcome to another interview. And we are glad that you're going to join us on this episode. This episode is one of those things that I love to talk about because it enhances us and it gives us growth in so many ways. But today, I want to introduce Tracy. Tracy, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Tracy, if you just tell the Farewell fans, can you just give them a little bit information about yourself?
Sure. Thumbnail sketch. I'm an integrative psychiatrist with over 35 years of clinical expertise. I have a pet pterodactyl. I've been at this for a while. And I also not only trained in Western medicine, I trained in alternative integrative approaches, holistic healing. And I like to say I went to Hogwarts for adults with some of my training. So I'm very eclectic.
Okay, I love them all. I love them all. So today we have a great show for you today. And I know y'all know that I love talking about relationships. I love talking about the human behavior and everything. And all that stuff ties in. Body language, everything. And one of the things that I really enjoy thinking about is our attraction to each other and how that evolves and how it happens. And we know that dating and relationships are so much more different now in 2025 than it was in 2015, in 2005, in 1995, in 1985. Throughout the generation, the way relationships and dating happens evolves with the times. At one point in time, you were courting young ladies or courting or men or being attracted to men that were in your neighboring area. And if you wanted to meet somebody else, you had to go a little further away or you had to go out of town. And you were only subject to the attraction of people in your own in your immediate circle. Then you introduce technology. Technology made the world so much more flatter. So now you were finding attraction to people all around the world. At first they was getting mail order brides from magazines. Now you are going online get mail order brides. So things evolve with time, and that is not and that's kind of not in the realm, but it's kind of in the realm of the conversation that we're going to have. Now, Tracy, one of the questions that I want to ask you is, when we're talking about, connections that people have, what are the 4 connections and how do they apply to relationships?
Sure. The 4 connections, I like to think of them as magnetic attraction points. And we have 4 realms that we can connect in. One is physical, the sort of vroom vroom, oh, they look sexy. I like their hair. I like their eyes, their body. That can include the sexual part. It can include just height and weight and the body that people are attracted to.
Yeah.
Second is emotional, that sort of, do they get me? Where you can be with some people and you can either start to tell a joke or whatever, and they're like, yeah, I don't get it, and that there's not much connection there emotionally. But with other people, all you have to do is you can walk into a room from opposite sides in a room full of people, see something, and then look at the other person. And all you have to do is give a look and they know exactly what you mean, or you can finish someone's sentence. It's that they get you, that emotional getting somebody. Thirdly is the intellectual pursuits. Do we like kind of the same topics? Can we have a good conversation? Do we like the same books, movies? Or is it, I don't get why you want to watch that TV show. I'm going upstairs to watch or read or do something else. So that intellectual connection is the third. The fourth is a spiritual connection, which sometimes is a bit delayed because I find younger people often may not see the importance as much of that spiritual connectedness. But as you begin to get to the other end of the life spectrum, that begins to be very important after you've gone out and you've done your work and you've got a family, if you wanted to have children and do all of that, and you're towards later end of life and you're looking back and you're wondering what's the meaning, then suddenly the spiritual is very important. So when you meet someone there can be attractiveness in one of these. Say you go to a bar. Wouldn't recommend it to hang out in a bar to find someone to date, but a lot of people
Okay.
do it.
Yeah.
And you might just see someone that you're just physically attracted to, and you're like, oh yeah, they look great, or they're hunks or whatever. And you see a lot of younger high school, college age, young adults will be very much attracted to that physical piece. They've got to look just right or be just right in some way that it's physical. And then there may be one or two of the other connections. The difficulty arises when we have fewer connections or they're not very tight, magnetically put together.
So I'm glad, I'm glad you said it like that. I'm glad you said it like that, because what that brings to mind is that most men are attracted to the physical aspect first, right?
Yeah.
And there are some women that are not attracted to the physical. They more so want to see what the intellectual and the emotional side is like, right?
Right.
In some cases, it's not all cases.
That's right. I mean,
because
there are some guys very in touch with that feminine aspect within
yes.
themselves, and with that, the emotional is much more important. And there are some women who are all about, they got to look just this way.
Now, let me ask you this. Now, we know that sexual orientation has expanded
Yes.
a bit. Okay, I think that at the time that I researched it, I think there were 16 different sexual orientations that were out there, and I think when I researched it again, I think it expanded to like 32.
It's a little
And
mind blowing at times, but yeah.
it's mind blowing. It's a little mind blowing. And the ones that always kind of piqued my interest was sapiosexual, which means that they're attracted to intellect. There's no appearance, there's not the emotional aspect or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's I need to have a conversation with you to see, can you stimulate my mind, and then from there that drives everything else.
Yes.
Then I've in another situation, I've met somebody that was attracted to somebody that was purely spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
It was a spiritual first. So when they met the person was Muslim and they were Christian. But as they were, having a conversation, they were more attracted to the spiritual nature and converted from Christianity to Muslim. And from there, they found love, respect, and admiration.
Yes.
And followed that person, in that direction. So my question to you is how much does the four connections play in the role of sexual orientation?
Well, that's fascinating. I think it really plays in the role of humanity, regardless of sexual orientation. Uh, there are attraction points, and as you say, some want that intellectual. I want to see, where'd you go to school, and what are you doing? What kind of job? Not because I'm interested in the money. I'd be thrilled if you were, this incredible philosopher and could talk on intellectual things. So some people really go that way. It's not seen as often, but it's definitely seen. And you can see where some people who go on news or speaking tours, and they may not be what people think of as classically attractive. They may be even much older, but you'll see some people just enraptured by them and gathering around them just because of the intellect. Uh, I think that, regardless of sexual orientation, when it becomes a habitus issue, like someone who is either heterosexual or bisexual or transsexual, it's really, what is the calling of what I am attracted to, whether that body be female or male or both. And there are some people who are truly connected to a person's soul. And that's where you'll see they call it pansexual, where it has nothing to do with the body a person is inhabiting. It has to do with, I feel so connected to you, regardless of race, creed, color, body, anything. And it has to do with a person's soul. And that can be a very tight connection when it's mutual and you feel that.
I agree. Uh, I'm glad that you said that, that mutual feeling.
Yeah.
There's only, I can account for myself. There's only so many times that I felt that really intense emotional connection with somebody that was undeniable, and honestly kind of make my mind go blank. It was, thinking about it now, it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary, and the reason why I say it's scary is because you could be intertwined with somebody, and a fear sets in that you don't want this feeling to end,
Yes.
or you don't want to part from the feeling because the feeling is so natural and so genuine that you don't want to be parted from the feeling.
Yes, it can be very, very intense, and that can frighten some people and make them go, "That's too scary. I'm running from this."
Yes.
uh, and if it's not mutual, and the other person is sort of like, I'm not sure, I'd like to date casually, but the other person is like, I'm so intently, bound to you, it can begin to
Yes.
be where this other person will start running away. And if it's a pattern with someone that they get that intense frequently with somebody, then often they'll end up seeing me as a psychiatrist saying, "What's wrong with me?" And we'll kind of talk about, how much do you open your heart? How much do you share to start? And to allow the other person, that we are free to love and to be loved without judgment, but so is the other person. You can't make someone love you the way you
Right.
want to be loved.
You cannot.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter the type of conversations you have. It doesn't matter how open you are. If you have to continuously over explain why you're doing what you're doing, then maybe that person is not right for you, because if they're questioning the things you do and you're saying it is out of care, is out of concern, is out of love, is out of admiration, is out of I want to make you better, I want to make you feel better, then maybe it's something that you may need to walk away from, because obviously the feeling is not mutual, and they can just be holding up space for you
That's
from
right.
preventing it from, and maybe it's not a preventative measure from you finding somebody, but they're just biding time until they find somebody. And those are some things that you may have to recognize in those situations. Now, speaking of those situations, and not necessarily holding up time, but let's talk about longevity.
Yeah.
Which of the four connections matter the most to long-term success, and can one compensate? Can one compensate for the others?
That's a great question. The one that can be the most difficult to maintain throughout the lifespan often can be the physical, because people will say, I remember when I got married, and I was very offended by it, but it was the evening after I had gotten married, and my new husband starts going, kind of feeling around. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm looking for the ripcord." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "What is it with women that once they get married and now they're the rings on their finger, they just gain a bunch of weight?" And I just went, "What? What?" So when people are so enamored of a physicality, due to stress, cortisol, people can begin to gain weight, or due to illness, someone could end up losing an eye or losing a breast or losing a leg. And some people really struggle with that. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that, or I'm not sure I find that attractive. And so you'll find with some couples, not all, but you'll find with some where that connectedness begins to sort of pull away with one of them. And if they
Mm-hmm.
don't have strong connectedness in others, we begin to have an issue. Now, like we had spoken about earlier, sometimes people don't think as much when they're younger, although I've met more younger people who are sort of seeking or searching and more spiritually thinking, and that may be a product of pandemic and kind of the world we're in, as opposed to when I grew up, although we had the Vietnam War. Okay, I'm dating myself. but but at that time, if you had a strong physical connection and some of the intellectual or emotional that's kind of there, but it was very strong with the physical, and that begins to fade if they begin to develop similar like-minded spiritual paths. That doesn't necessarily, like you were mentioning, have to be religious, you know.
Mhm.
And I often will do that in my psychiatric assessment as I ask all the wonderful psych questions. I'll get to, all the basic growing up questions. And then I'll finally say, are you religious, spiritual, both, or neither? And some people take offense at that. And what do you mean? And some people say, I love that you ask that question that way because I don't believe in organized religion, but I find that I'm very highly spiritual and I believe in something bigger. But I can see where people get into discord when suddenly one becomes highly religious, the other isn't, or they start dating and suddenly you meet the family, they're very connected physically, and suddenly you find the family does that very Southern thing where they go to church on Wednesday, with Bible study, and they go on Sunday, and sometimes they'll do extra things. And suddenly that's an expectation if you carry this relationship further. And if that's something that a person is not used to, that can be sort of suddenly that was not even in play and now it's very much a part, and that can lead to some strain over time. So if people are really wanting to, I want you integrated into my family, and this is really important in my family. And sometimes you'll see that where a family, it's really important that you get a PhD or that you go on and do this, but that's not what this person is into, but that's not what attracted us. And we intellectually connect otherwise, but the family expects you to be very connected at a high intellect level. That can be a problem. But the one that some people struggle with over time is that sexual physical attraction can begin to diminish because of difficulty with dysfunction sexually due to physical chronic illness or medication, which can sometimes be addressed, uh, or just you know, someone gains a lot of weight or has an issue that just can't jive anymore with someone's wishes or desires. So the physicality, if the relationship is primarily based on that, it's sort of, okay, how can that be compensated? Where are the things? It's hard to, and I would say impossible to develop if it's not there, an emotional, I got you sort of a thing. And that's where I think, now we see so many of the autistic spectrum, and some of that emotional stuff is a difficult connection with the autistic spectrum disorders because there's almost not quite what we call alexithymia, where there's not really connection to, I can't put a word on my feeling. I don't know what that is, but I know I love doing these things with you. But there may not be so much emotional getting as there is some of the other pieces. So, it's interesting to sort of see how things play out. I've, seen where with some arranged marriages, and yeah, we still see some of those. I've worked with a few people in my practice before where people have an arranged marriage that never met each other until the family
Mhm.
arranges it. But with that, often you'll have the religious connection because if you're both going all along with it, you've been raised in a very religious, uh, dutiful sort of family, and if that's a connection that we both get that, it can be good. Uh, and then, the physicalness doesn't even come into concept until they meet each other. So that's not even out there. And so you'll start seeing reliance on intellectual, and there's not even an expectation that you'll get me because you've never met me, you know.
Right.
Interestingly, some of those marriages, uh, unless they become power and control, sort of what you were hinting at is, I can make you do this, or I'm asking, why are you doing that all the time? I'm trying to mold you into what I want. That begins to be a controlling, toxic issue. Uh, you often will see some of these arranged marriages fare sometimes better than some of the classic marriages we have here. We have a
That's true.
50% divorce rate. And, I like to say to people who have had failed relationships who come to see me very depressed and anxious, I've failed. This is horrible. I feel so guilty and ashamed. I couldn't make this work. And I'll say, well, it takes two to really work together in partnership, and it takes two to dissolve ultimately. So,
Right.
let's look at this. Let's look at what that's about. And I'll say, go back and think about when you dated. What attracted you? And I'll talk to them about the four connections, and you'll begin to see them kind of think about that and then start going, wow, we really only had one connection or two. And I'll say, you can make it very well if you have three. If you have two, you know, you can try and work on the other two. But if you have two and you're going over time as a couple, you've got what I call two dangling participles, meaning if someone else comes on the picture where a person feels connected with those two and then becomes attracted with one of the other, now they've got a three connection, you've got a one. Now we've got some magnetic pulling away, and that relationship is going to be in trouble. And when people realize, when they've come to me with all of this guilt and shame and sadness and anger and angry at themselves, thinking I'll be alone forever, will often, when they understand how few connections they had, they'll kind of go, wow, it's amazing we kind of made it this long. And you know what? I deserve to have someone that I have a four connection with. I deserve to have someone at least a three connection. And I'll go, yeah, and so do they. So is it possible to come to a compassionate stance when it becomes more and more obvious that, is it compassionate to stay in this? I've seen a lot of couples who come in and say, we can't separate because, we have kids, but we're fighting all the time. They're drinking, they're seeing someone else on the side. There's all this chaos going on. And I'll just stop. I'll say, how's that affecting the kids? Well, we can't have the kids come from a broken home. And I'll say, is it better to come from a broken home than live in one? And what are you modeling for the children? Because kids pick up, my grandmother used to say, little pictures have big eyes, that kids are very intuitive. They're very empathic. They'll pick up on energies. And if you're telling them everything's fine, but there's fighting going on, they're hearing it from the other room, where's mom or where's dad? They're gone all the time, kind of, they're not available. You kind of start seeing the effects on the kids, and the kids will begin just their own foundation to model what's expected in a relationship between two people in a marriage or a partnership. They'll start modeling, this is how women should be treated, or this is how men should be treated. And they'll begin to, often without realizing it, model after one or the other. And if there's abusive things going on in there, the kids are much more likely to be attracted to someone who models that energy, which can be a problem, because then you can end up having someone who grows up and constantly is attracted to, subconsciously, someone who is like dad or like mom. And if that was an abusive scenario in that relationship they're modeling, they can end up being victimized, or they can end up abusing and not thinking, what's wrong with that? That's how I saw it was done. It worked, and that's kind of the problem, where I'll have someone sort of step back and see the big picture. Let's have a compassionate stance and kind of look back. I often will tell folks I work with, I'm like, imagine you're watching a movie. Let's just step back and get our etheric popcorn and start eating the popcorn and watch it and kind of go, this is a really bad dramedy, or can't they see where they really care for each other and they're arguing about something that is an issue that really, in the long run scheme of things, may not be important. And sometimes getting them to step back, see the big picture, get into a compassionate stance for themselves as well as for their partner, their kids, their family. And, that can be powerful.
Right. So, man, that was a lot.
And that's
So
right.
that was I mean, I loved it. I loved it, but I'm trying to unpack all of it. And there's a few things I wanted to say, and I'm trying to make sure I can get back to my train of thought. So I wanted to say that I have been in situations where the physical was there, the physical interest was there, the emotional interest was developing, the intellectual interest was there, but the spiritual interest was a disconnect.
Yeah.
And the reason why it was a disconnect is because at the time I was transitioning out of the religion that I was raised in. And in that transition, I was still dating. And as I was transitioning from religious, structured, organized religion to spirituality, I was still dating women that were structurally religious, and they were questioning the idea of spirituality. Now, before I got to spirituality, I mean, there was different aspects of religion that I had tried. Going to different churches, talking to different pastors, the like, to kind of get an understanding of what I was going through, not sure where I was going to end up. And sometimes there's no understanding in that transition. So if you are transitioning between some type of structured religion into spirituality, or even into to being an atheist, my best advice is to just kind of stay to yourself as you develop and understand where you're going. So when you are questioned about it, you can answer definitively without thinking that you're making the wrong decision. Because that's kind of where I was at. It was even after I explained it, it made me think that I was on the wrong path or going the wrong direction. I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, this is something that I believe in, and this is something I want to continue to develop over time, and kind of turn something into my own, and let it be that. And to talk about the other situation, there are times where it's all physical. There is no emotion. There is no spirituality. There is no intellectual interest. There could be a little intellectual interest, maybe not a lot, because you have to talk to this person, or this person wants to talk about something, and you kind of get into the intellectual side of it, right? There's been times where the physical is there, but everything else is just not syncing up. But you have the physical for whatever reason that you have it for, and that's the primary reason that you want it. It's the only reason that you want it, but the physical doesn't last forever. There's some relationship that's primarily built on physical appearance. There's no spirituality there. There's any emotional connection. There's little to no intellectual connection, but the individuals have each other primarily because, and just to clarify, physical doesn't always mean sex.
That's right.
let's make sure we keep that clear. Physical doesn't always mean sex. It could primarily mean that this is a person that looks good standing next to you, whether it's man or woman. This is a person that is extremely, beautiful or handsome to you, and you admire them, you love looking at them, and y'all take great photographs together. You think you're gonna have great kids together. It's the primarily the physical flesh that you're looking at, and that's what you like. Like, there are guys that like feet.
Yeah.
They depict a woman's beauty based on her feet. If she got cute feet, she's a beautiful woman. There's some women that's like, he has to have a six pack, or he has to be 6 feet, or 6'8", or 6'5". To them, that is the best appearance that looks great next to them. They want a man that they got to break their neck to look up to. That, everybody has their preference of the physical that they want, or that they need, or that they like, or, whatever the case is. Some guys like really big women. Some girls like really skinny guys. I mean, that's what's appealing to them. And regardless of what the other 4 realms are, as long as the physical meets it, they'll make the rest of it work.
That's right.
I've been in that position. I've been in a position where I didn't find the woman very physical attractive, but I loved their intellect. We had an emotional connection, and we kind of had the same spiritual belief. So we had 3 out of the 4.
That's pretty good.
And it was working well. But no, they're not around anymore. I know there's going to be the next question. Are the person around? No, they're not around anymore. And I mean, and it happens that way sometimes. Sometimes you can hit on all 4 chambers, but the other person is scared or insecure. And, that will be another part that I add, is the psychological. It's not necessarily a connection, but it's more so something that has to do with them, for why they can't move on happily into a relationship based on trauma, insecurities, or whatever happened to them. So everything that you said, I had a story for, so I had to go back. I was holding on to it like, okay, there's a break in the conversation. No, she's still going. So from experience, I want to tell the Farewell fans that yes, you could be in situations where you have 4 out of the 3. The physical may not match, but everything else is there. And then there's sometimes where the physical is there and everything else isn't there, because you feel like it's going to develop over time. And sometimes it just never get there. But also remember that the physical is eventually going to go away. There's not enough plastic surgery in the world that's going to make a person look young. There's just not enough plastic surgery in the world that will make anybody look like they're 25.
Right.
There's just none. There's none. There's not amount. There's not amount of veneers you can keep in your mouth. There's not enough Botox you could put in your face. You cannot fight Father Time. You're going to get old. Okay, you're gonna get gray hair. You can bleach it. You can dye it. You can do whatever you want to do. You're gonna get old. Don't rely so heavily in the physical attraction. Like, I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. They look so much as a physical attraction, whether it's men, women, because when you're looking primarily for that, what happens is that you limit the pool of people that you can actually talk to and develop a real connection with. And when you do that, you're going to find yourself seeking, searching, and looking for this particular ideal person that is yet to ever be found, because you're clinging on to what you want versus realizing what you need out of the 4 connections. Sometimes we need more emotional support. Sometimes we need more intellectual support. And sometimes we need more spiritual support. The physical can't support us as well as you think it will, because it's going to fade away. The physical is mainly an appearance that you want to put on for everybody else.
It's the Facebook of the relationships.
You hit it right on. It is the Facebook of the relationship. You're absolutely right. It is Facebook is the facade that hides the real truth. And that's what the physical is. It's a facade that hides the real truth. So if you're looking for somebody that's primarily with appearance and you think that they look really great and everything, there's something hidden there that's very toxic that you probably should look out for. I'm just gonna be honest.
And if you're in a room full of people and you're so focused on who meets my physical criteria, you may not be present to meet the 10 people in the room that you would have the 3 connection with. You just never know.
You're absolutely right. And that's where so I'm gonna tell another story. I love my stories. I got a lot of stories. So I enjoy going to networking events, and I enjoy going to single events. And when I go to single events, it's always interesting because you get what you pay for depending on which one you go to. Okay, the closer to free it is, the probably worse it's going to be. The closer to expensive it is, I don't know. I haven't went to an expensive one, so I always go to the ones closer to free, and it's always a shame every time I go. Like it's always a headache. So I go to this event, and I'm looking around, and as usual, there's more men than there are women. Okay, and then the selection of women. So we're going to say that there are 25 people in the room. Okay, 15 of those people are men. Okay, the other 10 are women. Okay, out of those 10, 4 are in my age range. Okay, another 3 aren't attractive that I don't find attractive. So then it only leaves 2. So then this is real life. This is real life. There's only 2. So then with the 2, you're fighting for their attention against all the other 15 guys. So you are 1 out of 15. Approach this person, trying to talk to them, trying to get their number. And I'm about to connect this to all 4 realms. Watch how I cook. So the first thing that you're going to look at is, okay, are they physically attractive? It's the first thing, right? So once you deem that they're physically attractive, then you get to talking to them. So now you got to see whether they're educated or not. What's the intellect like? Like, do they have common sense? How do they, they treat things? And you got to be mindful that you're at a bar and you're drinking. So, anything is liable to come out. There are people that are nervous and everything. And they give you icebreakers, and icebreakers just seem like, I don't know. But you're in here, you find somebody that's physically attractive. You're talking to them, you see that they have some sense about themselves. You're asking them questions, getting answers from them, everything. Okay. You may get into a little spiritual conversation, maybe not, or you may see it. They may wear it. They may have a tattoo of a cross, may have a tattoo of a saying, a script. They may have a cross on their neck. It speaks to their spirituality and how involved they are with it. So it is there. So you get a sense of it. The only thing you don't really get a sense of is the emotional aspect. You don't know if there's going to be an emotional connection there. So you only really have 2 realms to play off on while you're in this situation. And I was in a situation, I found somebody that was a little younger than me. Okay, so they was still sort of kind of in my age range, but not really. They was just over 30, which was kind of cool. But then again, it was kind of like, I don't know, you were born in the 90s. So it's a little weird era for me. I don't know, I need somebody a little closer to the 80s. So having this conversation and realizing, like, you know what? Hey, can I hang out with you a little bit more? Just kind of see what the vibes are and everything. And then you start to realize that after you go through all the 4 realms, sometimes you realize that some people intellect and emotional awareness or impulsive emotions kind of diminish their physical.
Yes.
So then you start to say, you know what, you're not as beautiful as I thought you were. And then and then you start to talk about the spiritual, and you see how deep they are in their spirituality, and then you start realizing, like, you know what, we're not even on the same spiritual level, and it's not there. And then you just realize that, man, I didn't wasted 2 weeks talking to this person, and I should have figured this out when I even said something at the bar. I can't even get 2 weeks of my life back.
That's true. And you made a good comment about sometimes when you begin to be around someone more and you see sort of where they are emotionally with the connectedness or just in general and intellect, they sometimes what looked beautiful now doesn't so much. It's an interesting thing. If you at first are not connected here, but you're open to, you're not going to, if you don't go into a room ruling out people based on physical, and you begin to just sort of find some activity where you can begin to sort of sense what is their spiritual, what is their emotional connectedness, what is their intellectual. If suddenly you begin to connect here, suddenly, if they're spiritual, you may find you just connect so much through the eyes that they begin to become so much more beautiful because you
Mhm.
see them in a whole different light. And what was kind of like, I'm not too cool on that. I'm noticing they walk with a limp or whatever. But suddenly a whole different aspect emerges and you're like, wow, they become more radiant to you.
You know, you're absolutely right, because I met somebody that, you know, had conversation. You know, I didn't really look at them physically. I mean, I did look at them physically. I'm not even gonna lie. I looked at them physically, and I was like, oh, you know, they straight. I mean, it wasn't the like top notch or anything, but I was like, oh, you know, they cool or whatever. And then I was talking to them. I'm like, oh man, we, you know, got great rapport. You know, have a good conversation, joking back and forth. And then I looked closely at them, and I realized, like, nah, this ain't gonna work. This ain't gonna work. And then you start looking at, I don't know which realm mannerisms fall in, but you start looking at, you know, certain mannerisms, and you just kind of like, nah, this definitely ain't gonna work. No, and that falls on the intellect. Certain mannerisms and approaches to certain things and attitudes, and you're just like, yeah, you know what, this definitely ain't gonna work, because as you get to know somebody, you're realizing you already have this criteria what you're looking for, right? And sometimes you kind of, you know, step outside that criteria because you're like, no, I would get something different to try. Get something different to try. You know, I'm gonna try and talk to this person, and you know, maybe this will bring me about, you know, something different and long lasting. And then you're like, nope, I'm not gonna do that again. Then you may try it again. But I say that to say that I've always been under the belief that you never know who you will fall in love with if you don't give them a try.
True.
And, me and my mom used to go back and forth about this because I was open to dating, you know, any woman that I came across, um, and you know, all races and everything. And my mom, you know, because you know she's older, um,
Hey,
her her opinions about that. My grandma was okay with it. She didn't care. My grandma was of the same opinion, like you never know who you're going to fall in love with. And I still believe that you don't know who you're going to fall in love with. So it's best to always be open to love. You know, when you limit yourself, you limit possibilities. And when you limit possibilities, you give yourself way much more time to be single, still trying to hold on and find this one ideal particular person.
right. And if you're open and you find someone that you're like, I'm not that physically attracted to them, but I really connect in all these other ways, you may have just met someone who now is going to be a friend. that will last maybe longer than many relationships or the rest of your life. And I love the point you made earlier about, as someone is sort of being a seeker and trying to find out their spiritual path, and you're migrating in that, and if you're still dating with someone who's got a very in a box belief, no, I'm not
Mhm.
judging that, but religions often are like, you need to be one of us and not something else, and you're
Mhm.
searching, it probably is a good idea to just sort of step back, be open to meeting people in other realms, meet friends, because you can't take anyone on your spiritual path, and you have to
Oh,
trust your own knowing, and a spiritual path unfolds, and it's a beautiful thing, and you may find yourself in very different places than you started, but often when you're there, you see the beauty of all of the spiritual paths, even in the boxes, and you see the similarities if you're on a spiritual path. And it really brings an openness where you really can connect with people in a less sort of judgy way in all of those realms. And it just brings a lot more peace and enjoyment, and makes everything kind of magical as you go through your day.
I agree with you on that one. And a lot of people in my family are very religious. They actually think I'm atheist, but they're very religious. I keep telling them I'm spiritual, but they don't listen to me.
Yeah.
They're very religious, and they have their aspects on religion.
Mhm.
And for those that I know that date that are religious, um, they all, and this is from my own personal experience, when I've dated people that are religious, they always want you to try out their church or answer all they, what questions do you have that you're confused about? Let's have Bible study. Let's just, I don't want to. Been there, done that, don't have questions. I have a great understanding. It's just not for me. And I've learned that in that spiritual realm, there are people will say that they're spiritual. I'm sorry. People people will say that they're spiritual and still practice under a structured religion.
Mhm.
It is like, you're not spiritual. Like, it's two completely different things between spiritual and religion, and you're being structurally religious, but calling yourself spiritual, which I find laughable. But in that spiritual realm, you have to be very careful when you're dating, because you can get somebody that is more religious than you are and expect you to be just as religious as they are.
Yes. Yeah.
And I personally don't think that people of two religions can function in a relationship. So if you have somebody that's Christian, you have somebody that's Muslim, or if you have somebody that's Catholic, and you have somebody that's atheist, and I've heard marriages, people didn't get married and had two different religions.
Mhm.
I mean, they didn't make it the distance. They made it like maybe 10, 15 years, and then eventually divorced because the opposing views were just too strong.
Often those come to big magnification once you have children that now are at an age where maybe one says, I want them to know this religion because it's strong in my
Right?
family and the traditions, and another will say, well, I want them to know this. And it can become interesting. I've worked with folks who, one's Christian, one's Jewish, and kids go to temple, they also go to mass, or and it's
Yeah.
sometimes I'll see the kids and I'll go, what do you think of that? And they'll be like, I don't know, I find both boring, because a lot of times kids aren't at a stage where they're really
Yeah.
understanding that spiritual. You can't understand the abstraction of that until you're at least 12, really. And, I've seen ones that make it where they can stand with that foot in the spiritual and see the big picture, and a foot in the religious, but not in the hardcore box, but saying, I love the tradition. I love the tradition of this. I was raised with this, Christmas trees and going to, midnight mass or whatever. And then another saying, I love the cantor, I love the chanting, I love the Hebrew and the Jewish faith. But if they also can say, I see the beauty of both. I see all avataric beings, as being incredible beings that have come here and manifested on earth to tell some truths and to tell one aspect of the truth. And when people can see that sort of above the physical, metaphysical approach, and I am a metaphysical teacher, I teach all sorts of things. That's my other hat. But, when you really step back and see the beauty of it, you see the similarity of the avataric beings, whether it be Jesus Christ or be it Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama, who became Buddhist, or Buddha. Buddha means enlightened one, and Christ means enlightened one. And it's people who walk this path, and they're seekers. And often people will come in, especially adolescents, they're like, I'm atheist. I go, oh, so you're against a god of any sort? I've seen some people who truly are, but most will go, well, no, I just don't know that I believe, and I kind of question. I go, that's a great place to be. That's called a seeker or an agnostic. I question. And when you question, that means you begin to be open, and it sort of awakens those spiritual senses, that intuition, that gut feeling, which is great in relationships. That helps do I get them? I'm picking up on the vibes. That's the thing everyone talks about now. I like the vibes. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? Because I know what I mean. It means I'm really, all of my senses are attuned, clairsentience, clairaudience, clairvoyance, and my physicality and awareness of things. But some people are like, no, I just like the colors in the room. Oh, okay. I'll kind of lean back and start eating my favorite popcorn again and watching,
And speaking of that, because you said something, about questioning religion, I would definitely say that you need to question yourself in a relationship.
Yeah.
Are you still comfortable in your relationship? Do you like the direction that your relationship is going in? A lot of people talk about communication, and they say that, communicating in a relationship, is very powerful. You got to keep it open. But nobody says that you need to question a relationship, question where you are in a relationship. Do you think the relationship can be better? I know some people do like weekly check-ins. Hey, are things going good? Is there things that you feel like I'm not doing that I could be doing better? And even if you apply the four connections, do you think we should eat healthy? I'm not saying you say, you know what, you need to go to the gym because you look like you packed on a few pounds. No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying, like, hey, maybe we should start eating better. We've been eating a lot of fast food lately. We're not cooking in. Let's go on a health journey together, having that conversation. Or saying, you know what, I don't feel as emotionally in tune as we did when we first met. Can we find some nights where we could rekindle, no cell phones, no TV. Let's just talk, whether you drinking wine or, whatever your preference is, just having that moment to just kind of talking and reminisce over some of the things that you used to do to kind of build that emotional back up.
That's true.
Same thing for the intellect. That conversation helps with the intellect, just so you can see the type of growth that the person that you would have done, depending on how long you have been with, they're going to intellectually grow, and they're gonna be part of different things. They're gonna learn different things, whether they sit on the internet or they're with their coworkers.
Right. Keep talking. I'm a plug in. Apparently unplugged.
Okay. And then if you look at the spiritual, sometimes some people's spiritual changes, they what they believed at one point in time, now they have a different perspective of, maybe it's from their coworkers or a family member, a new friend that have come into the picture. A lot of that stuff, takes into play in the growth of an individual. And sometimes those check-ins, like, how are you feeling, physically? Do you think we should, work out? Just recognizing different changes in a relationship, from the intellectual, from the spiritual, and everything, and making that decision that, hey, maybe we need to rekindle or spend more nights together and just have that personal time and that conversation. Maybe there's some things that we can do spiritual together. Maybe it's praying, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's yoga, just kind of developing that natural outer body experience sometimes, it's just with each other, and so you can grow and build. Like, that stuff is essential for the relationship, because you're having those check-in moments, you're having those conversations, and you're being open and aware, and you're building that rapport back with each other again and again and again, as you see out your days throughout the year and everything.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
Another issue is contracts. When people meet, the assessment, kind of looking back, assessing. I love that idea of assessing where are we with our connectedness, but also, a lot of people's core values are kind of contracts with each other. A lot of that shifted in different ways during pandemic, or due to issues, and kind of looking back, what was the spoken contract or unspoken contract we had with each other when we first met? Because often I will see where maybe someone meets just early. One person's a little older, one's a little younger, they're just finishing college or high school or whatever, and they get together, and it's sort of, I don't know what I'm doing, and the other person comes in with a contract of, I'll take care of you, and so they believe, it's that rescuing the damsel in distress, or rescuing somebody maybe out of a bad situation or their life. And then they fast forward 10 years later, 20 years later, and suddenly I've matured and I'd like to go to school or maybe work outside of the home. And now this person's like, that wasn't part of what our deal was. I wanted you to stay at home and I wanted you to do these things. It becomes, the contract shifted. I now, I used to, part of my contract is I want you to take care of me. I need you to take care of me. And now I've kind of shifted. I don't need you to take care of me. I want us to be equal partners and walk along. And that's where you'll see issues where all of a sudden all of these pursuits of the connections will begin to change. And when we feel like someone is having a power and control, or they're trying to hold me back from me being my best self or what my soul feels like it needs to be doing, then that begins to shake, rattle, and roll even a physical connection, because just like when you see the beauty deeper in someone, the physicalness becomes more attractive. When you see things are falling apart here and you begin to perceive the person is maybe not all for me, they're all for what they wanted our relationship to be, in that controlling aspect, suddenly they don't look as good to me anymore,
I understand. Well, Tracy, first thing I want to say is thank you for coming on the show. I really, really enjoy and love this conversation. What is one last piece of advice that you can give the Farewell fans about the four connections, and just um, whether they could try to consider staying or leaving? Like, how can they take these four connections and make a solid decision on their relationship?
I would say look at them. If you have at least two, the other two, it can be workable. But if you start becoming aware of, maybe if I choose to stay, especially if it's earlier on, what am I choosing to limit myself to? Because if I say, am I worthy of just being in a relationship with one connection, as opposed to, it's a lot of fish in the sea. There are billions of people on this planet. And trust me, there are going to be people who are out here. And then I have people who say, but I made a vow. Maybe we have kids or we don't have kids. I made a vow. And, isn't it what God has brought together, let no man set asunder? And I'll kind of stop and I'll go, how many relationships out there are relationships that maybe weren't brought together by God? Maybe they were just forced, because I believe if two people really have that powerful 4-point connection, I think that becomes a God thing. And it is almost impossible for someone to come in. I don't care how sexy, how much money, however, whatever. It is hard to get some two people who have this tight of a connection to even want to look outside of that for somebody else. So it's very powerful. And for people who get stuck with the idea of, I have a fear of the unknown, I feel powerless, I have to rely on them, I have guilt, I have shame, I have anger, I have resentment, we can't talk because of that. That's why I did do a book with a co-author, which is Bye Bye Self-Sabotage, Drop Your Baggage, Love Your Life. And it looks at all of those issues, but doesn't just describing. It gives you very quick tools and tips to get out of the anger, to rapidly diminish all of these overwhelming negative emotions. And then once you get back into your heart, you may say, actually, now that I can be in more of a compassionate stance, and maybe if they work on those concepts too, you may be like, we're back in our heart. Because to communicate, and people say, we need to have a heart-to-heart conversation. What that means is, I'm in my heart and you're in your heart. And that means, there are quick tools to rapidly get into your heart. One is called the Loving Compassionate Benefactor meditation. And, I like to help people. I put free tools, tips. I have videos on Shift Your Life TV, YouTube, and you can look up that meditation. It's free, and learn how to get into your heart. And it can change conversations. It helps kids. And there's also the Qigong, Qigong, Qigong emotional release technique for people who are like, I'm too angry to talk, or I'm too afraid. It can rapidly, in about 90 seconds, drop an overwhelming emotion so that you can then get back into your heart and not be trying to make a relationship decision out of fear or anger, but really get into a place of compassion for yourself, for the other person, for what each of you deserve and what each of you want, and compassion for the kids. And really, that helps you get back and see the big picture. And sometimes when you see the big picture, you can say, this has become a very toxic relationship that we're in with our children. And maybe the most loving, compassionate thing we can do is with compassion, not out of anger and beating each other up. Compassion, choose to go on two different paths and let the children have two peaceful homes and two peaceful parents. You're never going to not be a parent of a child. You don't divorce them, but what do you expose the children to? So I would say, bless each one of you in your journey, with whoever you're with, but have some compassion for yourself and begin to be aware of some of the beauty of your own gifts and abilities and the beauty of your partners, and see, is it compatible? Is this, do we bring out the best in one another? If we're constantly bringing out the worst, maybe it's time to step away.
I agree. Well, Farewell fans, we'll see you on the next go around. Make sure you tune in for the next episode. Peace.
Peace. Thank you.